What do you think's going on?
Dude, this guy's an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling. He's gonna out-wrestle this kid and show him levels.
A few moments later.
Why did this happen? How could this unaccomplished MMA fighter even possibly take down this highly accomplished Olympic gold medalist in wrestling? Hi, I'm PakMMA, and one of the distinctions that MMA fans seem to really struggle with discussing is the nuances of wrestling skill in freestyle, folkstyle, and even Greco-Roman sometimes, in translating to MMA. I'm here to hopefully teach you something new about the sport of wrestling, but also how to properly distinguish specific niches of skill regarding grappling within MMA. Very often, you'll hear an MMA fan say, "Oh, that guy's a good wrestler, but he's not really a good MMA wrestler." Now, what exactly does that mean? What makes a good wrestler in MMA? Well, first we have to start with what makes a good wrestler outside of MMA. Well, that's pretty easy. Look at the person's grappling or wrestling achievements. That's obviously going to be a tell in how good they are in specifically grappling only rule sets. You have the obvious shoe-in examples of Henry Cejudo, Olympic gold medalist, Bo Nickel, one of the most accomplished collegiate wrestlers of our era, and Yoel Romero, Olympic silver medalist. But I'd say that none of these fighters are necessarily that great of MMA wrestlers. So what makes a great wrestler in MMA? Well, this question similarly is pretty straightforward. Being a good wrestler in MMA means you're effective at taking people down and controlling them when they've been taken down. Now, let me clarify that you can make exceptions to this. Fighters who command a high pace with constantly shooting takedowns, yet not being the best at control, can still be considered good wrestlers in MMA. Guys like Merab and Gamrot come to mind. I'll also add an additional element to this, which is inherently the most different part of wrestling in MMA compared to isolated wrestling: the cage. This point is constantly brought up when talking about great MMA wrestlers like Khabib, Khamzat, and Kamaru Usman. Fighters that can grind their opponents and effectively wrestle up against the cage is another element that I would say constitutes a great MMA wrestler. The other obvious difference would be that if you shoot out in the open, you're changing levels from basically standing upright rather than the crouch down stance that is common in almost all forms of wrestling, which does make it slightly harder to transition traditional forms of wrestling directly to MMA. Okay, so why do I not consider guys like Bo Nickel, Henry Cejudo, or Yoel Romero, all accomplished fighters in the isolated sport of wrestling, as relatively mediocre MMA wrestlers? To start, it's because guys like Cejudo and Yoel can't really control anybody at a decent level. Both of them are pretty effective at getting takedowns, but neither has a real jiu-jitsu game to back it up. Besides, both Cejudo and Yoel come from a background of Olympic freestyle wrestling, where the rule set specifically caters to takedowns. Much less significance is put on the person on top, where all you have to do is stay safe in parterre, which literally means on the ground in French, for a couple seconds, and then you're stood back up. Unlike in folkstyle, freestyle matches very rarely end in pins or falls, as the goal of the parterre position from the guy on top is to gut-wrench their opponent and get them to roll to score points. The point of me rambling on about the difference in freestyle and folkstyle is that the top pressure and control are a significantly lacking part of freestyle wrestling's rule set. So guys who are accomplished in that part of the sport, like Romero and Cejudo, don't feel the need to fill in that gap of nuance in their wrestling. I'd imagine a guy like Henry almost thinks with some ego, I don't need to get better top control, I know enough about wrestling, and I'm confident that I can take down just about anyone. This also explains how Cejudo is taken down by a guy like Peyton Talbot multiple times, a very good young MMA fighter, but still vastly inexperienced, especially in wrestling compared to Cejudo. Henry Cejudo simply wasn't expecting Talbot to attempt to take him down because of the notion that he's a very good wrestler and that he'll be hard to take down. Even Talbot himself suggests that's why he took him down.
Was it part of the game plan to take him down in the first round? Like, was that something you wanted to accomplish to mentally break him, or did it just present itself?
It just presented itself. We were talking though, like me and a lot of the guys helping me out and in my camp were like, you know what, he's not going to expect you to take him down at all. So it is entirely possible that you could. And just knowing like mentally how demoralizing that is, like to be him and get taken down by me, I'm sure speaks volumes. So yeah, I was definitely looking for it when it was there.
It can also be said that similarly to the previous claims, Cejudo doesn't feel the need to evolve his defensive wrestling either, because he believes that it'll be very hard to take him down as the more accomplished wrestler. And although this is true for the most part, he has still been out-wrestled in moments by other fighters like Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili. Now I want to clarify that in bringing up both those fights and this Talbot fight, obviously Cejudo is out of his prime, significantly older, and undersized compared to that of Talbot, Sterling, and even Merab, who are all huge bantamweights. But my point is still pretty sound. Cejudo was certainly not expecting to be out-wrestled by Peyton Talbot. So to sum up the previous point, accomplished wrestlers don't feel the need to learn about the sport in areas that their rule set was relatively lacking, despite its importance in an MMA setting. And I'd say the same issues apply to Bo Nickel to a degree, but he's a little different since he's way more green than both Cejudo and Romero. Bo is also a bit of an outlier when it comes to my critique of MMA wrestlers because Bo had a much lengthier collegiate background in wrestling, which is folk style, the rule set that emphasizes control and dominance on top. The way that the wrestling ladder works here in the US is you go through high school's wrestling system, which involves state competitions, and if you're that much of a prodigy, you can go on to higher level tournaments, but regardless, after high school, if you want to continue wrestling, you usually do so through college. Through college, you can win NCAA championships, and even in high school, if you're good enough, like Bo Bassett, you can go on to the World Team Trials, and I also think the Olympic Trials. The World Team Trials is where wrestlers compete to see who represents the US at international tournaments through United World Wrestling. So all this to say that Bo Nickel is much more well-versed in folk style, while still having wrestled a lot at an international level, where freestyle is the normal rule set. Bo has shown for the most part to have solid takedowns, but he's still very hesitant sometimes, like showing respect to Paul Craig's guard game of all people, who you really shouldn't feel the need to respect as a highly touted wrestler. Bo Nickel's clinch game was also exposed by RDR in their fight, where he was promptly smashed by knees to the body, and Bo really had no answers for De Ritter's pressure in that fight. I think if you've learned anything from this section of the video, it's that you shouldn't judge a fighter's wrestling based on their accolades, and that you should purely judge their ability to wrestle in an MMA cage based on their actual performances in MMA. So to answer the question, what exactly is MMA wrestling? MMA wrestling is the skill in which you take your opponents down by means of typically upper body to lower body connection, and it also encompasses the controlling of your opponent's body, whether that be on the canvas or up against the cage. It can also be said that neither of those things necessarily need to be true as long as your takedowns are effective and you can keep up a high enough pace that your opponent simply can't keep up with, which is only really applicable to Merab, but also from a defensive view, it's the ability to negate all of these particular elements. Some fighters are very good at takedowns, some fighters are only really good at controlling, and some fighters can do it all. By the way, obviously, my critiques of these fighters in these videos is not to discredit them in any way. They're all great and amazing fighters, but obviously I want to specifically dissect their skill sets and accurately represent what they are in the sport of MMA. There are fighters who have showcased the skills of wrestling more effectively than those of these fighters who have wrestling accolades. By the way, if you want something fun to watch during this long break from the UFC, go watch the next RAF or Real American Freestyle card, which will have Bo Nickel versus Yoel Romero in a freestyle wrestling match, which is pretty ironic considering that they're both pretty heavily in this video, along with Armin Sarukian and other big names in the American wrestling world like Bo Bassett and Caden Henschel. It'll be headlined by former UFC middleweight champion Luke Rockhold and current UFC welterweight Colby Covington. It's a good entry point into watching the sport of wrestling for those of you who only watch MMA. Some fighters have already competed on these cards like UFC welterweight Joaquin Buckley and former welterweight champion Bilal Muhammad. UFC lightweight Michael Chandler also wrestled former UFC featherweight Chad Mendez. Obviously, when UFC fighters wrestle actual high-level freestyle wrestlers, they're very likely to lose, but it's still fun and adds good name value to cards, and I think it's very worth the watch. As a matter of fact, the actual sport of freestyle wrestling is far from the perception of pure control grappling in mixed martial arts. It's actually extremely entertaining and one of the highest-paced sports in the world. It streams on the Fox Nation, I think it's a streaming service. That's kind of weird, but you could probably get a free trial or something. Just watch this one card. So I definitely recommend checking it out. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below. This is PakMMA. Goodbye.
Because of inactivity. Kush, am I wrong? Or am I wrong?